as a conference curator, there's some people that we know and we love them and they give great talks, and then there's other people that you observe them from afar and you think like, oh, if one day I could have him join this conference, I'd be so happy. And Trevor McFedries is one of them. You might know him, or you might know of little Michaela, the virtual influencer. Trevor did that. And you might have heard of Friends with Benefits. We're going to explain later. But actually, Trevor, you started out in a completely different career, and you've been at this festival before.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I was mentioning yesterday, about a decade ago, I was here playing music as a DJ. So I'm a software engineer who kind of stumbled into music and ended up making music professionally. I was in a rap group that put out a top 10 album in the States and actually played like the Dome in Mannheim. I went to like Baden-Baden and did radio. So Germany was very good to me at different stages in my life.
Okay, so you're a musician. You had a top 10 album. I know you also worked with some big stars. What did you do for them?
Yeah, as a music producer. As a music producer or kind of a DJ, I've heard like Katy Perry, Kesha, 303, a bunch of acts. I've been very lucky to kind of sit in front of computers and make stuff, which is my happiest place versus being on stage talking about it. So I'll do my best up here.
Now, I think that's all relevant in view of what we're going to talk about here, because this entertainment industry, because you see the tech systems and the underlying processes, and you work in the entertainment industry. That's one industry where there's many people involved to make a product or service and bring it out there, right?
Certainly. I guess kind of all Adorno culture industry stuff is what I'm excited about. I get excited about that 0 to 1 moment, true innovation, and I think I started in kind of more kind of traditional culture industry, film, music, etc., because I thought that was the place for innovation, but as I ran into these industries that were dominated by fear, I was more drawn to the kind of software products I was building where it felt like there was a ton of white space and areas for me to make crazy stuff, and turns out that bet was right.
So you have this super successful career. You have the top 10 album. You have the fantastic clients. I know you also worked as one of the earlier people working at Spotify, working with artists. So what is the first thing that you thought, like, okay, I'm going to do something in this wild new world? Where did you start?
I guess, Brud specifically and FWB are really extensions of my life. I grew up in a small town in the States, about 30,000, where the center of life is American football and kind of all of the cliches you can imagine from American television. And I always dreamed of doing things when I left Iowa that could be connective tissue between the kind of taste palettes of the Midwest and these big cities. I moved to Los Angeles when I was 16, and starting to make music, the dream was to make music that was progressive, interesting, radical, but also could connect dots between those places. And when starting Brud and creating Little Michaela, what I saw was this macro value shift from what I call meat space, our everyday IRL lives, to virtual. And it seemed silly at the time, 6 years ago, to say that this coming, what I called spatial computing future, which is now, I guess, called the metaverse, would be driven not by universes in the kind of Ready Player One context, but rather by IP and characters. Pokemon Go, I think, was a good example of that you would follow Pikachu into a new mode, a new experience, and that if we created a character like Little Michaela that could tell stories in a Web 2 context, much like a Spider-Man or Mickey Mouse, that as that character bridged into an emergent future, we could take that audience with us and begin to build virtual economies that were bigger than we had known in kind of the trad celebrity or kind of like entertainment world. And
so let's just go to the start of this. So you think of this virtual character, Little Michaela, you have some concept, it's a creative idea there, but then, so from the start you were thinking this is a person that will get a big following, a virtual person, but then will also keep going for many years. So she would basically grow older. And
for those who aren't familiar, the parent company was called Brud. We were acquired last year by Dapper Labs. But the thesis was if you were going to build Disney or Marvel, 6 years ago, you wouldn't have started in comic books or in cinema. You would have started in social. And I really saw Instagram like panel by panel storytelling. It's presented as though it's reality when we all recognize that a lot of it is fiction. And there was an opportunity to create these what I call parafiction narratives, similar to professional wrestling in the United States, where the context is a space, a boxing ring, a wrestling ring, familiar for real events, but it's scripted narrative. And in those moments, you're kind of forced to take pause because if someone's getting hit with a chair in a ring, you're like, wait, I thought this was fake, but that seemed real. And in a world where you're infinitely scrolling, that pause is really important. And so what I wanted to do was to create a fictional character that was built for kind of an emergent future, but that would make sense contextually in narratives that are familiar for people, the kind of trad influencer stuff, things you would see a Logan Paul or Charlie D'Amelio do, and embed stories in those that were about kind of more macro conditions. And because we believe narrative can change the world, we tried to use this character as a way to teach young people about identity, about macro conditions surrounding climate, economic issues, pandemic.
But because it's like you've invented Mickey Mouse at the start of the Walt Disney Company, right? So you've invented Michaela because you see her as a character. I mean, she's super popular now.
10 million plus fans,
Yeah, who follow her, who know she's a virtual character.
Certainly.
In the beginning, that was a little bit
she
opaque,
was, first celebrity signed to CAA, which is like, the biggest talent firm, represents Tom Cruise, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Prada campaigns, Samsung global campaigns. She is, in every way, shape, or form, a celebrity, except she's just software.
Yeah. So, and just out of curiosity, so she's just software, and then we'll talk about what that will be in the future. But right now, so you have somebody there writing stories for her, giving, she's got a boyfriend or no longer. That's, that kind of story. But that also those, those daily interactions, those visuals she posts online. Well, what is the team behind the virtual character? How much work is it?
Yeah, I mean, like any kind of, engineer brain person, I thought we'd be able to build software solutions that could kind of minimize the turnaround times for a lot of these things in 6 months. It ended up being about 4 years. But a lot of software for animation and other things, it's built for AAA games, it's built for films, these longer lead times. And so we built an engineering team that allowed us to create kind of middleware and solutions such that we could come up with ideas and turn them around oftentimes in 6 to 8 hours. And so there's an engineering team that's pretty significant. We have a creative team that's, folks like myself that kind of understand the technical constraints and then can build narrative around that. And then your kind of traditional organization functions, HR, kind of operations, all the sexy stuff.
But you actually make the storyline for her? Her life?
Yeah, originally I kind of dreamt it all up. And in the world there's, and this is where it gets quite confusing for those of you who aren't aware, because Michaela is in the narrative an AI sentient robot living in Los Angeles, our organization is represented in the story as well. And so we act as her handlers who liberated her from this evil organization, who created another character to compete with her. I mean, it goes down. It's really like a Marvel universe. And there are fan wikis, if you want to go deep, that kind of cover all this stuff.
And do you think that sort of next steps, story-wise, she will have her own feature film? Or, I mean, because this new kind of narrative in this new online world of social media, does it start and stay there, or are there other outlets where she will go?
Well, the dream for me was to kind of invert the traditional pyramid. I always saw it as starting with a longer form, Star Wars, and that being turned into a video game, maybe into a comic book, all the way down to a lightsaber that you would buy at a supermarket, whatever it is. I wanted to kind of turn that around and start with this, a still image of a character, and then work up that stack such that now we are developing television shows and film programs, and there are clothing brands, and
there will be a prequel sometime in the future.
Certainly, yeah. And the one differentiator I would say is that when you engage with the greatest storytellers of our times, the Kardashian, Jenner Wests, there are these infinite different paths you can take down because they're real characters. You can go into Robert Kardashian and O.J. Simpson and all of these paths. And traditionally, when you're kind of engaging with a television show, there's a fixed amount of media you can engage with. One of the nice things about Michaela is that there's this surface area of a television show, and you can go into the social life and her friends and me and my real life and our interactions. And so it has some of that density and that depth that I think young people expect in modern narrative.
And then the last thing I want to ask about Michaela, because we invited you for something else, but
yeah.
She's part of that as well. I mean, so Michaela as a virtual person with all those stories, will she stay young forever, or will she grow old with her audience, get kids, married, divorced?
Yeah, so it's quite silly, but in the narrative, she's 19 forever, right? But she gets hardware upgrades and software upgrades, which are kind of these allegories about body modification and pressures, and she gets nasty comments on Instagram about changing her eyebrows and has these conversations about whether she should modify her hardware. Much the same way I think young people feel pressure to modify themselves to fit contextual beauty standards or whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, she's 19 forever. Now, the reason we invited you was, this conference is about systems, and the systems digital systems that we are observing, that are changing the world. Of course, there's the whole Web3 development. We've already discussed yesterday NFTs, and metaverse has been a theme throughout the 2 days. But the one thing we didn't really discuss is DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization. And you set up one, you founded one, Friends with Benefits, and that's a DAO. Now maybe, for those of you here, what is a DAO? Maybe the first basic understanding that we need to have.
A DAO, DAO, stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. You can think of it like an organization, a company on chain. However, that organization or company isn't ruled in an authoritarian way, in a top-down CEO way. It's in a more democratic fashion traditionally, where anyone in the community can come up with a proposal, and then people who hold tokens, often called governance tokens, can vote on whether the organization will pursue that direction. So I often jokingly call it a group chat with a balance sheet, and it's actually a nice model to think about it.
Yeah, so there's everybody can. It's like a cooperative, you know. I mean, it's not completely new to think of formats where people are part of the bigger whole and can co-decide, right? So what makes it so important now that, because I know you feel that this system could really change how entertainment is developed and run in the future. So why now? What is the thing that's happening now that makes this cooperative work more important?
There are probably a few macro trends, right? I think obviously remote work is trending, and this idea that you can contribute to lots of different organizations in real time is one that some people are doing, more honestly, and some doing more, covertly. I think I saw a Reddit subreddit dedicated to, like overworking or something like that, where engineers have 4 full-time jobs. Because they're working 2 hours a day at Google doing nothing, and they can kind of stack these things. There's a desire to contribute in organizations, and I think DAOs enable that kind of mobility. I think beyond that kind of future of work stuff, where people are more than their narrow skill set, they're more than engineers, they also have design interests, they have managerial interests, and the ability to kind of plug and play into different organizations on their terms is very interesting. And then ownership is kind of the through line of all of Web3 that I think is very important, especially in media. If you've grown up in a media environment where you've created and handed things off to kind of Web2 players that have extracted all of that value, and you've seen a pittance, the idea that you could build an organization that you have meaningful ownership in as a creative person is very, very appealing. And so they've seen big winners in DeFi, or in kind of NFTs, things, Bored Apes, et cetera, and the idea that they could build a kind of a collective or creative organization where people have ownership in tokens and they're seeing a kind of real-time reflection of that value in token price, I think is quite appealing.
Now, the fact that creators, doesn't have to be professional creative people, but creators can get some value back of helping a brand, of being part, basically, of the enterprise that a fandom can be, is a super interesting thought. You've been now running. Well, you cannot run a DAO, right?
Yeah.
You've started this DAO. So how many people are in it? What are they doing? What is the value they're getting? What makes them stay? And what comes out of it? What's the result of it?
Yeah, and it requires a bit of a reworking of kind of the way you understand organizations. I always say kind of Web 2 was like, create a product and then build a community. Web 3 is build a community, let them kind of birth products. And so what I did was try to create a really simple model for creative people to understand what a DAO could be and what network value can look like in Web 3. So to start, we created a private group chat, a Discord, with some software that gates who's allowed to enter. And in order to enter that Discord, you needed to hold 50 originally tokens, FWB tokens. In the beginning, there were a million tokens and a fixed amount. And so it was very simple conceptually that if you joined this group chat and you made it more compelling by contributing and creating value in that place, people would want to join. More demand on a fixed supply of tokens should mean that the token value increases. And what people saw in this experiment early on was, wow, if I premiere a song here, or I do a conversation, or if I recruit my other friend who's very interesting, I can see that value reflected in that token price rather than that value reflected in Mark Zuckerberg's net worth. And people saw that, they got excited, they started contributing, we kind of rode that NFT wave. But the group now is about like 4,000 plus. There are probably about 400 active contributors to the organization. So a lot of people kind of passively hanging out, enjoying it. I think about like a city. DAOs to me feel more like places than trying to trad organizations, and that you have what we would consider like citizens, kind of hanging out, reaping the benefits, living in different parts of the DAO, almost like boroughs. And then there are people that that choose to be a part of the governance. And so we elected a mayor, Alex Zhang, who's the mayor of FWB. We now have different orgs. There's events, there's editorial, there are operational parts of the org.
Things are being made, right? I mean, there's newsletters, there's an event.
Yeah, there's newsletters, there's events. The community voted to make an energy drink, so we partnered with an energy drink. We made an energy drink. There was a very tenuous moment where venture capitalists wanted to invest and buy some of the tokens, do what's called a treasury diversification in DAOs. And what's funny is that I've raised $30+ million for my trad corp from Sequoia, world-class VCs, and in talking to these VCs now, I was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you got to go pitch all the DAO members for them to accept your dollars, and to kind of invert the power dynamic where a bunch of internet trolls are pinging Chris Dixon, and Lee Jin, and asking them to explain why they should take their money, I think was quite powerful and kind of a nice insight into the future where people power is real on the internet.
But so those people get together in this DAO. Apparently, are those outside investors interested because you have such an interesting group of speakers? So is that specific brand what they're interested in? Or are they just going for, whoa, this is an interesting principle, we can apply this everywhere, and we want to have this software? What makes the money people interested in?
I think any investor worth their salt would say they have no idea where this thing is going, but you kind of bet on compelling teams and ideas that they believe could resonate. We've got a team of folks that have been able to see around corners thus far, so they're probably hoping that's the case. Early on there was a narrative of FWB as kind of being this digital Soho house. I think it's like a decent metaphor for what it exists as currently. It's a place where people get value from the community in and of itself. That said, our software team has created a lot of really compelling products. We created a tool called Gatekeeper, which people use at physical events now at kind of Web3 gatherings all over the world that validate that you hold a token, an NFT or an ERC20 or a fungible token to get into a place. We now kind of license that software to different teams. We've created this membership directory that acts as kind of a passport through Web3 places. You get stamps on your little membership passport that shows what you've done, what you've participated in. That enables all kinds of identity. So right now there's collateralized lending. You can imagine a world where there's kind of more traditional kind of uncollateralized lending, where maybe I see that you've been a part of a community for a long time. We have more trust, so I do a kind of peer-to-peer loan with you. This is kind of getting...
So basically, it's an early first example of what happens when you bring a community together, where you could track everything that they contribute of value, or even a chat can be a value.
I kind of think of it like a city, right? I think of all of these layer one blockchains and the communities and DAOs that they form as cities and boroughs, and that we have this robust community of people who feel pain, and they speak to the representatives and say, I don't like this, this should change. Can we use what is effectively our tax base, right?
And this lives on a Discord.
Yeah, primarily, but really,
but it could also go elsewhere. If the whole community votes for it, then they could move it.
Certainly, and it lives beyond that. I mean, because Web3 is this, this open database where you can kind of engage however you'd like. Because a lot of our community is really active in NFTs, for instance, there are third-party websites that track the tokens that FWB members are collecting, and so so FWB lives everywhere.
Yeah, so it's very happy, it's very in front, and they will. Now, coming back to this idea, okay. If we can have DAOs, we can have a completely different way of value distribution in an entertainment world, in the world of fandom. How would this play out for a super artist, but also for all the other people involved? Because I think one of the reasons why you are doing all this is also to make sure that many more people can be creative and get value from it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the core of what I've done forever, I think, is try to make sure that innovative people, creative people are rewarded. I think the incentive structure now is quite broken. I often joke we live in this Forever 21 era where a lot of value accrues to fast followers with better distribution, and the people that are innovating are kind of left with nothing. The thing I think is interesting about media orgs is that Web 2 was pretty tough on them. Mike.coms, Vices, BuzzFeeds of the world, they've struggled to kind of innovate because they're playing on a shifting playing field. Where I get excited is thinking about an organization whose output is media, that sells media, which is kind of novel. We lived in this media environment where like you create media and then like you sell advertising against it, or you create a makeup or cosmetics brand against it, or it's silly that you can't be rewarded for creating things that people love. And so non-fungible tokens solved that piece for us. It sounds bizarre, but people do want to buy media that anyone can engage with. They want to collect it because it's valuable to them. And so the idea that you could build an organization that looks and feels probably familiar to a traditional media organization, but members can flow in and out of it dynamically is what we're building. A DAO, where let's say you are a media DAO where your output is video. And anyone, a member of that DAO can say, hey, I want to go do a video essay on the Rubicon. And collectively you say, you know what, I think that makes sense. They say, I need $2,000 to do that. Sounds good. We collectively believe that asset that we create will want to be collected by someone and will be sold for $4,000. We allocate capital. That person independently goes and makes this asset. When it's submitted and verified on-chain, funds are deployed. When it's submitted on-chain and then collected, funds are deployed then back to the DAO treasury to enable more creation and back to the creator. And what we've seen with things like Little Michaela is we've built this brand where people can be a part of it and create assets that are bigger than their own individual output or more valuable than their own individual output. And so the dream is to create these headless brands, these decentralized brands that people can plug in and out of and kind of create value as they see fit.
So this community creates media without being led by one person. They do it together. Can you tell us, and we almost have to wrap up, I see. Can you tell us what this means for Little Michaela? Because I think you want to put her to DAO as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of, I guess, the anti-Disney in that we want all of our IP to be held by the community. We want this thing to live on forever. There's this concept we call exit to community, where traditionally as a media organization or as any organization, you could exit to public markets or you could exit to an acquirer. We love the idea of people building organizations and saying, you know what, we're going to hand this off to the people that love it and allow them to be the stewards. You can imagine things like Vine that weren't able to kind of live on being maintained by a community that loves them. And so we were acquired, our parent company was acquired by Dapper Labs last year, and Brud Inc. Is becoming Brud DAO. And so Little Michaela and the rest of our IP will be community owned. And we're basically open sourcing all of our tooling, all of the software tooling we're building on the Flow blockchain so that the community can maintain it and use it, and that hopefully folks out there can just fork it, copy and paste it and experiment, whether they're a two-person YouTuber team or a giant kind of Web2 media org that's looking to try a different business model.
Fantastic. Very much looking forward to what it means for the media and entertainment.